There is growing fear that the Supreme Court's conservative majority could make it easier for states to get away with racial discrimination in voting. The High Court heard oral arguments on Wednesday in Louisiana versus Calais, which centers on Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. It protects minority voters from discrimination, and those who defend the provision argue that if it no longer stands, the consequences could be devastating. Take a listen.
Were Section 2 to cease to operate in the way that you just described, what would the results on the ground be?
I think the results would be pretty catastrophic. If we take Louisiana as one example, every congressional member who is black was elected from a VRA opportunity district. We only have the diversity that we see across the South, for example, because of litigation that forced the creation of opportunity districts under the Voting Rights Act.
Joining us now is Janae Nelson, who you just heard in that clip just there. She is president and director counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and this week she argued her very first Supreme Court case to protect minority voting rights. Janae, thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure you're extremely busy right now. Can you walk us through what the stakes are for those who may not be familiar with this section of the law and its significance?
Absolutely. So Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is the provision that is still operable after the Supreme Court gutted a key part of the Voting Rights Act in 2013. So Section 2 is a permanent provision, and it stops discrimination in our electoral process by looking at redistricting or other voting practices and determining whether there's discrimination or racism in the society or district that we're looking at or jurisdiction, and whether that interacts with our electoral processes in a way that makes it more difficult for different groups of voters to elect candidates of their choice or to participate equally in the process. What Section 2 does is guarantee an equally open process to everyone, and that's what we're fighting to preserve.
And so how is what states like Louisiana are doing undermining that right, if you will, to not be discriminated against, or the ability of people in those states to have their constitutional rights protected and not be based on racial preference?
That's right. So Section 2 is grounded in the Constitution and the 14th and 15th Amendments. And states like Louisiana often draw districts in a way that minimizes the power of minority voters. So, for example, in 2022, after we got our census, every decade there's a new census. And in 2022, Louisiana drew a new map based on the new numbers, and its white electorate was declining and still is declining, and the black electorate was increasing. And nonetheless, the districts didn't change. Louisiana has 6 congressional districts, and black Louisianans could only have an equal opportunity in one of those districts. That made us do a deeper inquiry to find out whether those numbers indicated that there might be some discrimination in the electoral process. Unsurprisingly, we found that there was. In fact, Louisiana has a long history of discrimination and a lot of current and contemporary discrimination that's happening.
What do you mean by equal opportunity? You said that there's only one district where voters had equal opportunity. Sorry, can you just explain the term?
Sure. So under the law, an equal opportunity or an equally open process means that a group of voters doesn't usually, and this is the word of the statute, usually have their votes canceled out or minimized by another group of voters. That basically black voters or any other group of voters has the same shot as their peers in the electoral process. That's what equally open means. And what happened in this instance is that black voters, their share of the electorate was expanding, and yet they were seeing no increase in political power. And when we did a deeper examination, we saw that black people, for example, have never in the entire history of the state of Louisiana been elected on a statewide basis. You know, not governor, not lieutenant governor, not senator or secretary of state. And that is one indicator that there might be racism in the system. And there were many more, most specifically the fact that there's severe racially polarized voting in Louisiana. And that is what was deeply concerning and what mandated a new map to make things fairer.
Can you paint a bit of a historical picture here and just what the Voting Rights Act means to black voters, black families across this country? for me, my friends who've been talking about the erosion of this for a while now, but certainly this week has sort of there's been a drumbeat. You know, I think about my grandparents who were pushed out of Georgia by the KKK in part because they had done voting rights organizing in that state in the first half of the 20th century. And so for people who may not be familiar with how hard we had to fight to be able to go to the polls, how significant is this moment?
Well, one of the best ways to describe it is to use some of the words of Chief Justice Roberts, interestingly. He said that for the first 100 years of the 15th Amendment, which gave black people the right to vote, or black men initially, that the 15th Amendment was nothing but a parchment promise, meaning we had a right on paper, but we did not have a right in practice. And it took the Voting Rights Act of 1965 to give us the ability to exercise that right. And that statute did not come easily. I mean, you point out the sacrifice that so many Americans made. John R. Lewis was beaten and bloodied on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Black Americans lost their lives, and allies of theirs were also targeted in an effort to make this a true multiracial democracy. And while the Voting Rights Act is precious to black people, it is also equally precious for the future of our democracy. It really is the birth certificate of our multiracial democracy. We've only been at this project for 60 years, and that dates back to 1965, the passage of the Voting Rights Act.
Janae Nelson, thank you so much for being with us.